Good evening and welcome. I'm Neil Gordon, CEO here at the Discovery Museum. I'd like to welcome you to the fourth event in the 2022 Discovery Museum Speaker Series. Tonight's event, Playgrounds versus Playpens, Coding, Computational Thinking, and Robotics in Early Childhood with Dr. Marina Bers. I'm very much looking forward to tonight's conversation, and I want to thank you all for joining us. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. So we'll be reserving some time for live question and answer at the end of the evening. And you can submit your questions anytime during the talk using the Q&A button. And we'll address as many of those questions as we can. If you have any technical questions, you can use the chat button to reach the webinar hosts. Tonight's presentation is being closed captioned, and you can turn that feature on or off at the bottom of your screen. In addition, we'll be recording tonight's presentation, and a link to that recording will be available and sent to all registrants as soon as it's ready. So before I introduce Marina, I will need to give a quick shout out to the sponsors of the speaker series, and then also tell you a bit about the museum. So I want to thank the organizations whose sponsorships have made it possible for us to present the speaker series free of charge now in its 10th year. Our lead sponsor once again this year is the Foundation for Metro West, a community foundation that strengthens and improves the quality of life for residents in our Metro West communities. Since 1995, the foundation has been providing financial and educational resources to local nonprofit organizations, sharing essential data about the region to inform decision-making, and partnering with donors to increase the impact of their giving. Our partner sponsor, Enterprise Bank, is headquartered in Lowell, Massachusetts, with 26 branch locations throughout the Merrimack Valley and the north central regions of Massachusetts, as well as southern New Hampshire. Enterprise is a true community bank, leading with a deep sense of mission and purpose. Their success is consistently measured by the success of the individuals, businesses, and communities they enthusiastically serve. We'd also like to thank tonight our friends at NetScout. NetScout makes sure that communication services and businesses can operate securely without interruption or slowdowns in performance, and take down cyber threats before they wreak havoc on global networks. NetScout's success is powered by their culture of innovation and unwavering commitment to their employees, customers, and communities. We want to thank these and all of our generous sponsors for their support. A little bit about the museum, and then we'll get started. So the Discovery Museum has been serving the children and families of Massachusetts and beyond for 40 years, which we're celebrating this year. We've been celebrating the anniversary all summer and will continue into the fall. You can come visit us any day during the month of October and pay just $2.50, which is what the price was when the museum first opened its doors in 1982. The museum's 40th anniversary is no small milestone. To put it in context, when we were founded back in 1982, there were fewer than 100 children's museums in this country. There are now been 400. Our work was unique then, but it still is now. Like many children's museums, we bring experiential, play-based learning to kids and families. But the Discovery Museum also adds an overlay of the scientific method to inspire discovery and foster kids' natural curiosity. And we make it a priority to emphasize the outdoors and nature-based learning. We provide a broad-based learning environment that is inspiring for kids, and then we work very hard to make it possible for that to be available for every kid. Building on our commitment to encourage children to appreciate and care for nature, we've set ambitious goals to reduce the museum's carbon footprint and to do so in ways that are very visible to our community. One of the most visible initiatives of our sustainability plan is the recent installation of 326 kilowatt solar array canopy, which has made the Discovery Museum the first children's museum in the country to generate 100% of its electricity needs through on-site solar. In fact, we produce more electricity than we need, and we are providing the excess energy to other nonprofits at a discount. In addition to the 40th anniversary of the Discovery Museum's founding, 2022 is also the 10th anniversary of this Discovery Museum Speaker Series. We're proud to host these conversations that are on topics we know are important to kids and families in these complex and challenging times. We have one more event in this year's series. On November 16th, you could join Silky Rose West and Joseph Sarasi, who will be talking about the art of storytelling. Registration is now open on our website for that event. As we celebrate 40 years, we're looking forward rather than back. What's next for the Discovery Museum? We know that it includes getting kids prepared for the future. To us, that means helping kids be better equipped to embrace the diversity of humanity, helping them learn to use their voice and to stand up for themselves, stand up for truth and for science, and to stand up for each other, as well as helping kids to be prepared to confront perhaps the biggest issue of their future, climate sustainability. We'll do this important work in age-appropriate ways that are good for both kids and families. We welcome you to join us here anytime. So with that, we are so pleased and excited to have Marina Bers join us tonight. Marina, nice to see you. I'm going to tell them a little bit about you. Marina Bers is the August Long Professor of Education at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. She's also affiliated with the Computer Science Department and the Schiller Institute for Science and Society. She is the director of the Interdisciplinary Development Technologies DevTech research group, which she started back in 2001. And at the time, she was a professor at Tufts University, Elliott Pearson Department of Child Study and Human Development. Her research involves the design and study of innovative learning technologies to promote young children's positive development. She's a pioneer in the field of early childhood technology with projects of national and international visibility. Marina is the co-creator of the free Scratch Junior programming language, which is used by over 30 million children all over the world. And she's the creator of the Kibo Robotic Kit, which helps children learn how to code in a playful way without screens or keyboards using wooden blocks. She's the author of 5 books on the topic of education, new technologies, and children. And her newest book, Beyond Coding, How Children Learn Human Values Through Programming, was published this past spring. Marina, we're really thrilled that despite all that work you've got to do, you've had the time to join us tonight and talk to us a little bit about kids and coding and their development.
Great. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Neil, for the introduction. And it's wonderful to know it's been 40 years of the museum. The museum is special to me because I used to take my kids when they were little to play. So it's very nice.
Thank you.
So yeah, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And I imagine everyone can see it. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the work that we do in my research group. As Neil mentioned, my research group is called DevTech, Developmental Technologies, and I started at Tufts. Just a few weeks ago, I switched after 21 years at Tufts University to Boston College Lynch School of Education, and DevTech came with me. The people, the students, the postdocs, the research staff. And at DevTech, we focus on new technologies for early childhood. That's all we do, and that's all we've been doing for a long time. And what does it mean? It means that we design and create products that have been and are out there in the world. And Neil mentioned some of them, like Scratch Junior and Kibo Robotics, and I'll be showing you lots of videos and talking about it. We also create new prototypes. This is CRISPy, is to understand the code of life and genetic engineering. This is at the prototype level. It never made it into a product. But technologies without theories are not good. So here are some of the books I've written where they all focus on how do we go about using those technologies in ways that highlight children and their needs and their developmental abilities and their possibilities. And of course, we do research. We're a research institution. We do from understanding what happens in the brain when people program, what areas activate, to developing curriculum, trying new curriculum, working individually in classrooms. And we do lots of outreach and professional development, both online and face-to-face. And if people are interested, you can check my website for more information about any of those. So before I start talking, I know this is a virtual format, but we're going to try something new. I'm going to ask you, it's hard to be sitting in front of a screen, right? So I'm going to ask you to look at these pictures and use your chat function to try to see which one doesn't fit here. Which one is the one that you think is out of place? And I'm going to ask you to please type it in the chat. And these are theories, right? So we can be right, we can be wrong, but let's just share what you think. Someone is saying the computer, someone is saying the watch. Maybe the person that said the computer, the buggy. So the watch has electronics, the buggy also has electronics, the computer has electronics. Somewhere there said water. I would like to understand why the person that said water why, if you don't mind typing why you think is water. Water is usually people say that water is out of place. And I can't tell if why Cam said it, but I suspect because it had something to do with nature. And however, it had something to do with nature, but there is a sensor. So there was hidden in this faucet, there is a sensor. So there is electronics because someone programmed that faucet. And then I see that someone there Joe type the stuffed toy. And yes, probably if I ask Joe why the stuffed toy, okay, Cam said it's a basic substance. Yes, the water is a basic substance. The faucet has an electronic. And if we can see why the stuffed toy, the person that typed the stuffed toy, probably I suspect is because you do not see electronics, right? It just feels like a stuffed toy. Usually that's right. It doesn't appear to be electronic, right? Of course. So you're all guessing because you don't really know. And that's absolutely right. So the one that's out of place here is the stuffed toy. It's a stuffed toy that doesn't have any electronics inside. Every other object has some form of electronics. The umbrella has sensors that detect humidity. So someone programmed those sensors. The same thing with the necklace. It has sensors that follow the heartbeat. The stuffed toy is just a stuffed toy, and that's it. So why I like to talk about this is because it took us some time to understand which object was out of place. And the world of today is a world where computer science programming comes into everyday objects. It's not anymore in computers. It's all over us. And as children grow, they are going to have to need to understand this new world. And understanding this new world means that there are smart objects. And what does it mean? It means that someone programmed those objects. They're not smart on their own. It means that there was a smart person who programmed those objects. And that the tool they used for programming was called programming. And behind the coding was the thinking. And in the field, we talk about computational thinking. So those are key words to really understand the 21st century literacies in terms of technology and children. So computational thinking, it's a buzz term right now. You probably, if you have a kindergartner or up, it's probably require that they start learning about computational thinking, starting in kindergarten. Most districts, most schools, most countries. And what does it mean? It means thinking like a computer scientist to solve problems. That means using abstraction, using sequencing and algorithms, using modularity, design processes, and a bunch of things that we're going to be exploring. So the term computational thinking grew in popularity. A few years ago, if you look at the number of publications that use the term computational thinking, there were almost zero. But now, and if this graph kept going, it's all over the place. You cannot really talk about computer science or technology in the classroom without talking about the kinds of thinking that happens. And this is important because computational thinking goes beyond just programming a computer. It has to do with thinking processes that you can use in everyday life. And we'll be talking about that later. So what are these powerful ideas of computer science? What is it that people that engage in computational thinking do? Well, we have identified 7 that are developmentally appropriate for very young kids. But these same 7 ideas go all the way to your professional life, to college, to high school. It's just that they get more sophisticated. So let me give you examples. An algorithm. If you are in early childhood, you understand an algorithm as order matters. Sequence of actions, sequence of instructions, following a recipe. It's the same as programming a robot to dance the hokey pokey. However, as you grow, you understand that there are very complex algorithms and you have artificial intelligence and algorithms, and it gets a lot more complex. But the idea, the basic idea is the same. And so the 7 that we have identified is algorithm or sequence, representation, design process, hardware and software systems, the idea of debugging or fixing problem solving when things do not work, modularity, and control structures. So if then, and control structures is interesting because very young kids starting at 2 or 3 years old, when they start telling stories, and I know next presentation is going to be about storytelling, they use control structures. And so we use those when we teach children how to program. So these ideas of bringing computer science to children, right now we all talk about this, but it's pretty old. What you see here is Seymour Papert. He was the first person, he was a professor at MIT. This picture is from 1967. At the time that computers were big, he said, we need to develop programming language and robotic systems to teach children programming. 67. And what you see there is a picture of the turtle logo and a picture of the screen logo, which, if you are my age, you probably grew up learning logo. So it was a turtle that you give them commands to draw things, and, forward 120, right 90, repeat 4 times, and you have a square. So Seymour Papert, at the time, was the director of the Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT, and he wanted to create artificial machines. So he said, who's the expert in the world? Jean Piaget. Who's the expert on intelligence? And the most intelligent machines that exist, those are children. They are the best learners. So he actually went to Geneva and worked with Piaget because he wanted to learn how to create artificial machines. But after working with Piaget, he then realized, I'm going to switch around. Instead of creating artificial intelligent machines, I want to help create the next generation of intelligent humans, children. Therefore, I'm going to create a programming language for them to think in new ways. So I was lucky that Seymour Papert was my advisor when I came to the US. And I did my doctoral work under his supervision at the MIT Media Lab. Of course, I never met him looking like that. This is in his hippie years. But the seed of logo was planted in me when I was a child. Back in 1980, IBM had a big project in Argentina. I'm originally from Buenos Aires, where they brought logo to kids, and they were giving free snacks after school. And my parents sent me. And so I learned logo when I was 10, and little that I knew then that, years later, I was going to come to MIT to actually study and work with Seymour Papert. So Seymour was crucial because he developed technologies, but he always thought virtual and robotics, both at the same time. And this has inspired my work with Scratch Junior and Kibo. We want screen-based and we want tangible. So this is one of the first robotic kits for children, and it's called Lego Mindstorms. Some of you might be familiar with it. I was lucky to be a student at the Media Lab, and when we were working on the first earlier versions of Lego Mindstorms, and the name Mindstorms is in honor of this 1980 book that Seymour wrote that's called Mindstorm Children, Computers, and Powerful Ideas. So this is the basics. This is what we're building on. This work on coding has been around at least since 1967 for children. But nowadays, it's not just in a lab at MIT or in one country, it's all over the world. You choose a country, tell me the country, and I'll tell you the national initiatives that are happening to bring coding into that country. And there are many, many reasons for those. However, this is what leads, is we know that there is a need of jobs that have computing expertise. So that's the red on the slides. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need only computer scientists. It means that in any discipline that you're going to study, you are going to need some understanding of computing. And so this workforce need is driving and pushing computer science education to start earlier and earlier and earlier. And why early? I love this graph. It's a graph by James Heckman, who was a Nobel laureate in economy. And he did a very interesting study with colleagues that looked at which are the programs that return the most on your investment on a country. At what age should they start? And what they found, which is not surprising, is that the programs that are targeted at the earliest year yield the most on the investment. Later on, is less and is less. And it's so interesting because when we think about computer science and engineering and robotics, most of the programs we're familiar are for middle school and high school. And unfortunately, that's late. We are going to get usually the white boys who have an engineer in the family to do that. What research shows is that the girls and the minorities, they're usually not going to go. Stereotypes in terms of who's good at STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, start to form by 3rd grade. By 8 years old, people will say, I'm not good at math, or I'm not good at building, or I'm not good at computers. So we should really, really start our programs young. The same way we start our programs when kids of literacy when they're young. And this is a new literacy. So how do we go about that? I just gave you the hint. This is a literacy. So let's think about it as a literacy. Of course, these children cannot understand any of this programming language because they cannot read and write. We need to start in early childhood. When they're 4, when they're 5, when they're 6, when they're 7, they're just mastering the art of reading and writing. So none of this is going to work. So we developed Scratch Junior. This is a collaboration we started with my friend and colleague Mitch Resnick at the MIT Media Lab. And Mitch had created Scratch. And Scratch, which is fantastic, was designed or is designed for children 8 and up. And if you haven't played with it, I invite you to look at just Scratch. When my children were little, I tried to work with Scratch, and it was impossible because they needed an adult working with them. So I went with Mitch and I said, Mitch, how about we create a version of Scratch that's for little kids? And we said, sure. And so we went about working on Scratch Junior. Right now, since 2014 that we launched the project, we have 35 million users in over 194 countries all over the world. And remember how I mentioned that Seymour Papert, my mentor, and who also was Mitch Resnick's mentor, always worked with screens and tangible technologies, both. I had to do the same thing. So at the same time, I created Keyboard Robotics with my DevTech lab, which allows children to learn how to program with wooden blocks. And we got a big grant also, who allowed us to build a company funded by National Science Foundation. It's called KinderLab Robotics, and KinderLab Robotics mass fabricates these keyboard robots, and right now it's in over 65 countries. And so both of our technologies, Scratch Junior and Kibo, solve the issue of how we bring coding, computational thinking to children who are just developing traditional literacies. So how do we go about it? This is a picture of Scratch Junior, and when you program, these are your blocks. Very few words here. It's a sequence of commands. And in Kibo, here's your Kibo with a nice story. And here is your programming language made of blocks. It has sensors, it has motors, it has a barcode reader. And so let's start with Scratch Junior. So what you see here is you can download it for free. And you can choose a background. You can take a picture or choose from a library. I'm going to take a picture of a plant. And now I'm going to create my characters who interact with the plant. I can choose from my library, draw my own. I'm going to choose a frog. And I'm going to program my frog. When I start on the green flag, it hops twice. It grows twice, it shrinks twice. I can make a sound. I can put my sound in my sequence. I can repeat 4 times this sequence where order matters, and I can end. And now I click the green flag, and then you see the frog. When I finish, I can create new pages. I can use a grid for doing math, and I can use text. So that's in a nutshell what Scratch Junior is all about. And what you saw is, in fancy terms, an algorithm. Remember the earlier powerful ideas about computer science? Algorithm was one of them. It's a sequence of instructions. So with Kibo, which is tangible blocks, it's very similar. And instead of me explaining, I'm going to let the expert, this 5-year-old child, explain to you how he created his program.
Deep, go forward. Then I'm going to be like, to the right, no, to the left, right, left.
And he goes and he's scanning the blocks with his robot. No screens, no computers, in traditional forms. Presses a button, and there's a robot performing, following the instructions that were given to it. So, similar idea, we're going to focus on an algorithm, a sequence of instructions. Sequencing is fundamental for all forms of literacy, for numeracy, for even how to get dressed in the morning, right? When it snows, I don't put my pants first and then my underwear. I go the other way around. There's a sequence, right? And so sequence is fundamental for any kind of discipline, academic and life. So we designed the technologies, but as I mentioned, technologies without an approach, a curriculum, a set of guidelines is not enough. So we created this, we have a pedagogy and a curriculum that's called Coding as Another Language. For us, coding goes beyond STEM. It's really another language, and we'll explore what it means in the rest of this talk. So first, if you ask me, what is the basic of your curriculum? This is the basics. We engage children throughout the curriculum, throughout the experiences in the design process. And it's an infinite loop. We ask questions, we imagine, we plan, we create prototypes, we test and improve our prototypes, we share our prototypes with others, and once we share, we have new questions and we go again through the design process. And when we work with children, we engage them in this design process. Some teachers say to me, well, we don't have computer science time in kindergarten or in first grade. How do I fit this in? Where does it fit in my curriculum? And so I said, do you do this? And if you look at this is a literacy time where they are pre-writing, planning a draft, revising and editing the draft, and then publishing and sharing with the class. And so there's also a design process when we create a piece of writing. And this is also the design process that had to do with science and with experimentation, and something that the museum is very well known for, discovery, right? And I'm sure that I ask each one of you, what's your profession or what you do in life? And I'm sure you'll have a design process that is similar. So for us, that's the core, that's the backbone, that's the skeleton of our curriculum. We want children to understand that when we do things, we do them not once, not twice, we problem solve, we go through a design process, and things don't always work the first time. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples now of how we integrate this into the classroom. So the Very Hungry Caterpillar, wonderful book. It's this hungry little caterpillar that goes around and stops to eat different food. So children read the book, and what they do is they program the robot to stop at the different foods. So there are many ways to do this. They can count how many robotic steps it takes from fruit to fruit. If they're more sophisticated, they can use different sensors to sense when there is a change of light. They can create repeat loops and so forth. And then as they start learning the beginning of what is a sequence, this is what usually happens in a classroom. This is a classroom in Singapore. So children are programming a pretty sophisticated sequence. So we always start our computer science class or our robotics class by dancing and singing and movement. We choose songs that are very sequential. And so the Hokey Pokey and programming the Hokey Pokey and dancing with your robot is one of our favorites. And we have Hokey Pokeys all over the world. And if we do it with children, we also do it with teachers.
You put your right foot in, you put your left foot out, you put your left foot in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about.
So what you saw here is one of first days on professional activities, actually in professional development, where they were learning how to program these keyboards. These are all early childhood teachers. They're not as fun as the kids, you know, most of them are sitting down. So this is a view of the curriculum. It's free and available on the website. It's designed for 24 lessons. We have coding as another language for Scratch Junior and coding as another language for Kibo, robotics, and it's very visual. And there's always an opening text circle. There's time with a computer or with a robot. There's unplugged time, which is activities, word time, where we reinforce our vocabulary around computer science. We have a closing text circle and of course, opportunities for differentiation. And something that's very important to us, and we'll be talking a little bit later, we have social-emotional aspects to it into every lesson. And it's always built in terms of putting powerful ideas of computer science in conversation with powerful ideas of literacy. How do we go about unplug activities? That means low-tech activities. So this is one of the first classes where they are teaching children how the symbols of this programming language. Symbols are very interesting. When we learn the alphabet, we also need to learn symbols.
Begin, forward, spin, and see. The wheels are connected to the motors. The memories are connected to the body that engineers give it a program.
So this is again traditional computer science classroom, not what you imagine or what you expected. Kids work on their own, they work in groups. They sometimes use their bodies to measure how many keyboard steps it will take from the robot to go from one corner of the room to the other. They use arts and crafts to decorate, and they can get very sophisticated. And sometimes they even want to eat Scratch Junior or Kibo. These are different cheese colors that they made during snack time. When you work with Scratch Junior and you have tablets, it's a little bit harder because you have a screen there. And we still want to bring the playground approach, the playfulness. And so we try to create activities that connect children. That means that bring screens together. So children have to tell stories together. So each one or each pair might have one screen, but when put together, they can tell a bigger story. And I'm going to share with you that they do that with a very, very simple language. This is all there is for Scratch Junior. Just like language, that we have 20-something letters in the alphabet. Well, similar with Scratch Junior, with most programming language, you have a limited amount, but with that limited amount, you can do beautiful things. And I'm going to show you one of those beautiful things that have been done by combining multiple tablets. So what you see there is children starting the different tablets. And they program each one of them to be synchronized and to tell a story about the Chinese New Year. So I love this project. We have similar projects for almost all festivities around different cultures around the world that celebrate light. So this is an example of how we use imagination and creativity even when we have screens. Because for us, coding is really like a playground. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that. We have four very important concepts or pillars in our work. And I'm going to share those with you in the rest of this presentation. The first is coding is a playground, coding as a playground. The second, we already explored, coding as another language. Third, coding as a bridge, and we'll get into that. And the fourth, coding as a palette of virtues. So the rest of the presentation, what we're going to be doing is we're going to explore each of these four pillars. Let's start. Coding as a playground. And I'm going to ask everyone again to bring up your chat so you can start chatting. And I want you to think, what kinds of activities happen in the playground? I'm sure all of you have experienced or observed a child in a playground. What are children doing? Can you type it in the chat? What are children doing? They are digging. They are exploring. They are pretending. What else are they doing? They are doing all of these things. They are sliding. They are using their bodies. They are climbing. They are running. They are jumping. Lots of physical activities. What else happens besides physical activities? They take turns. Yes, they take turns. They learn how to solve conflicts. They test their limits. They try things that they don't know. They brainstorm. They work in groups. They pretend. They choreograph. They take risks. That's an important one, right? They push themselves, not because an adult is telling them or there's an exam, but because they want to push themselves. They are creative. They imagine. They use language. They communicate. And we can go on and on and on. So if I have to teach a child development class 101, all dimensions of human development you can experience in the playground. You have the social component, you have the emotional, you have the language development, you have the cognitive development, physical development. You also have moral development. You know, do I cut the line and go first on the slide, or do I respect my turn on the line? Now, have this image of the playground and contrast it with this other one. That's a playpen. So what happens in a playpen? Playpen is a lot more limited, right? Children can choose to play with one or two things, but those are things that usually adults choose and they hand them down to the children. There is a limited space to take risks, limited space for conflicts, limited time for interaction. And usually the adults need to, it's a safe place. So if I need to go cook, it's okay to leave the child in the playpen for 15 minutes, but I will never dream of having my child in a playpen for 2 to 3 hours. But the playground, a full day, they'll be happy in the playground. So you're all familiar with playgrounds and playpens, and I use those as metaphors. Coding is like a playground. It's open-ended. It allows you to engage on many, many of the things you mentioned before. Playpens unlimited. Unfortunately, when we think about technologies in early childhood, most of the technologies are playpens. They are limited, they are repetitive, they are for one skill. There's nothing wrong with them, right? But you don't get confused. They are not for imagination, right? So if technologies change all the time, and all the time we're offering new technologies for children. So I like to say, if you're offering new things or you see things, how do you know if you should buy it or download it or get it? Well, I said, run it through the playground test. Is this a playground type of environment, or is this a playpen? Is this open-ended, or is this limited? That's idea number one. And in the playground, we see children engaging in what we say the 6 C's: communication, collaboration, community building, content creation, creativity, and choices of conduct. And I don't want to go into the whole theory, PTD, positive technological development. You can go into my website and download papers and so forth. But basically, all of our curriculum for Kibo or for Scratch Junior is built around these 6 C's, and each lesson focuses on these 6 C's. Our assessments are also built around this. When we assess children to see if they're learning or not, assess in an informal way, we want to understand not just if they're very good at creating content, but can they collaborate as well? And if not, how can we create environments to foster all of these 6 C's together? Let me give you an example. This is a public kindergarten in Argentina. And I love this video because you can really see a true playground. And I'm going to ask you to, as you watch the video, identify for yourself the playground moments that you see here. So what's striking in this video is that you see lots of kids. Kindergarten classrooms in Argentina have around 30 children with one teacher, maybe 2. And you don't see here the teacher. The children are playing, are doing things on their own. Just like in the playground, where children are engaging, discovering, trying things out, and the parents are usually, or the caregivers are sitting on the benches. And you can see there in the back of this picture, an adult sitting with her arms crossed, just letting the children explore playground style. And if we work with children, we do the same thing with adults. So we had a big project in Singapore, and this is how we train early childhood teachers. We had to train 200 at the same time. We did it in a playground style. And how did we do it? Well, Singapore has a beautiful zoo, and we always choose something that teachers care about. And they were very proud of their zoo. So we invited them, again, preschool teachers, to create an animal, their favorite animal on the zoo. So this monkey is responding to clap and lights turn on.
You're so cute.
It's using a sound sensor to detect the clap, using a distance sensor to detect where the drink is. So what you see here is the resulting animals, and you will not see two animals alike. And this is the power of a playground, right? Where even if you're making a lion, any lion is going to be different. And that's what education and learning is all about, or it should be all about, letting us express our individuality, letting us express what we care about and what's unique to us, as opposed to have something that everyone repeats. So traditionally, when we think of computer science education, of if you went through computer science degree, you were all given the same test, the same task, and you all had to get the same end result. That's not what we want here. We want all our lions to look different. And here you have a picture of a Minister of Education in Singapore at the time, where we were doing a big national project called Smart Nation. Singapore understood very early on that if you wanted to have a smart nation, you needed to have smart kids. And so they launched this program in preschools. Second idea, coding as another language. I mentioned before, it's the literacy of the 21st century, the new literacy. And why limited coding to STEM or STEAM, 4 or 5 letters? No, it's a lot more. Coding is really about a whole alphabet. It's more than just STEM or STEAM. Just like language, it involves using a socially situated symbolic system and a grammar to comprehend and express ideas by creating artifacts. This definition of language applies to natural languages, English, Spanish, Hebrew, Arabic, you name it, as well as artificial languages. Those are programming languages. And what they allow us, both natural and artificial languages, is to think in new ways. We talked about computational thinking and meaning making, interpretation, creating, because at the end, literacy empowers people. And when we think about literacy, we're talking about traditional literacies, learning how to read and write, together with new literacies, learning how to program. And our curriculum, our approach, it's coding as another language. That's exactly what it means. So we think it's a useful skill, like everyone. So when we learn how to read and write, it's not so every child will become a novelist or a writer or a journalist. No, it's a useful skill for everyone. Same thing with computer science and learning how to program. It's not just for the software engineer or the computer scientist or the nerd in the basement. It's a skill that everyone needs to have. In our curriculum, in the way we integrate is we have, of course, programming with Kibo or Scratch Junior, but we have books. And all of our curriculums have units around 2 books. One is a book that tells the story of a woman or a minority in the field of computer science. And children have to create a project retelling their story. And the second book is a fiction book where children come up with different endings through their projects. So here is a wonderful project about created by a first grader about Grace Hopper. Grace Hopper was a computer scientist that was, people credit her with having coined the term debugging. And at the time where computers were big machines and you had cards, there were little bugs that will get into the cards and they will create mistakes. And so you had to debug, take the bug out of the card so you will fix the system. So children read the story of Grace Hopper and then they created their own interpretations of what they read. And you see here this project by a first grader. She already knows how to write. And you see her there, Grace Hopper, who found the bug, takes the bug, fly away. And there you see the bug flying. This is a fairly sophisticated project, both in terms of its creativity, but also in terms of the programming language and the concepts that were used there. For Kibo, this is an example. The beautiful book was an old lady who swallowed a fly, and they basically had to recreate the story.
Okay, go ahead.
There's the old lady that's gonna travel to eat the different animals. So there was a lot of math involved because they had to calculate how many steps, this is kindergarten, between all the different animals. And again, here are some of the powerful ideas of computer science that we talked before, but now you have images. You understand how children created sequences, how they represented books, how they engage in the design process, hardware and software, debugging, modularity, and control structures. And we put these powerful ideas of computer science in conversation with powerful ideas of literacy. And that's how the curriculum with these 24 units are built around. Here's a teacher talking about her experience.
We're talking about setting, we're talking about sequence, and we're talking about characters. I could see from their coding if they understood what those items, those literary devices were. So that was wonderful. We're talking.
Third idea, coding as a bridge. Once we have languages, we can use language to communicate with others, to cross the bridge, or you can use language to make walls and separate people. Of course, we understand coding as a bridge, as a universal language that might help people who don't speak the same language to communicate with each other. And by language, I mean different cultures, different religions, different traditions, different countries. And this is a classroom in Arlington, Massachusetts, where kindergarten classroom where kids came from all over the world and they did not have English proficiency yet. And so during the summer, they wanted to bring them all into some level of English, and they decided to incorporate Kibo and the coding as another language curriculum. And this is one of the very, very first lessons where the teacher is showing kids how you program, and pay attention to what she does.
The robot can only read barcodes and it can read them in a certain order. So if I just tell my robot, go, please, it's not gonna go. Does anyone want to try to tell this robot to move and see if it understands any other language? Do you speak any other languages besides English? Why don't you tell your robot, turn on your light and move in Japanese? Yeah. Start moving, robot.
Go like that.
Doesn't understand. I want to try in another language.
The video goes on, and every single language that we can think of is represented here. So what this does, it brings a whole classroom that felt that they could not speak English at the same place, because this robot did not understand the teacher in English, did not understand Japanese or Spanish or Vietnamese or French. It only understood computer programming. And this is a project where it took a little further. This is a project in a school in Argentina where children were exploring the different languages their generations of immigrants came from. And they programmed the robots to come all the way to Argentina from different parts of the world. So there was a little bit of geography, a little bit of social science, a lot of art. You see this, the beautiful map they created. Third idea. Once we have language and we use the language to create bridges, we can choose how we want to behave with the others. And that's what we call about a palette of virtues. And I love metaphors. And during pandemic, my husband took on painting. And I noticed that when he created his palette of colors, it wasn't always the same. If he wanted to paint a sunset, it was one palette. But if he wanted to paint the bright sun, it was a different palette. And so I like that metaphor. And I take the idea of mixing and matching and creating to the idea of the virtues, the values that we bring into the coding playground. So we have identified 10 over the years where we've seen children helping each other, expressing gratitude, open-mindedness, curiosity, perseverance, patience, optimism. They forgive each other and also forgive themselves when things do not work, honesty, generosity. So of course, this palette can have many, many colors and many shades. And what we do is when we work with teachers or with parents, we ask them, what is the palette of virtues that you want to bring into your coding playground? Because this is what most people think. They would say, oh no, we don't do, this is not a values class or a moral class or a civics class. We are teaching computer science. And they think they have an empty palette of virtues, but that's not true. The way you distribute the materials, the way you allocate time, the kinds of projects you create are all going to show the things that you value the most. So for example, if you value perseverance, you are going to encourage children to keep trying and trying and trying. But if perseverance is not in your palette of virtues, you might not encourage them to do several iterations. And so when we think of coding as a palette of virtues, what we want is people to be explicit, purposeful about the values, the virtues they want this coding playground to have. So if you are familiar with 5-year-olds, you know that this doesn't happen naturally.
Okay.
Left.
So what you saw there was children working together throughout a problem. No one was stealing the robot. No one was taking the blocks from each other. They learn how to talk. They learn how to collaborate. They learn to ask each other for help and only get the teacher for, at the end. That doesn't happen naturally. That's a lot of hard work. And it is a teacher who was intentional, in this case, about his palette of virtues. So for every class, every lesson, we have certain C's on the playground and certain virtues that they get reinforced. And I want to start concluding with this, one of my favorite quotes from a teacher.
Really blossomed when they might struggle in some other areas, but they were able to do the same concepts like creating a background or setting and characters and stuff, but in a different way. So it helped highlight strengths for everyone, really. I didn't have anyone who everybody blossomed with this. And I would say it builds confidence, value, to where they believe in themselves.
This is beautiful. Here you have a teacher who's been teaching computer science, and her highlight is it builds confidence and value where they believe in themselves. So if you want to learn more about some of this work, you want to get the papers and the research and a little bit more into the stories and the theory and these are my two latest books, Beyond Coding, that just got published by MIT Press, and Coding as a Playground. And what are we doing now? We're doing lots of research, continuing the research. We are starting a huge project all over the world with 29 nonprofits organizations who are translating our curriculum and conducting studies to understand how different cultures appropriate coding as another language and adapt it to their own way of doing things. And so thank you very much. And I hope to hear from you. You can go to my website as well. And I'm gonna stop sharing now so we can engage in the Q&A.
Marina, that was great, and you know, incredibly sort of thorough, and with all the videos that were just like remarkable to see, you know, how well kids were embracing this all. So you know, we have a handful of questions from folks so far, and if folks have other questions, please use the Q&A and type them in there. But you know, let me just sort of start by, you know, asking what you sort of learned so far about starting this coding and at an early age, programming at an early age, and all of the positive things that you talked about in terms of language development and virtues. How have we found that continues as kids age? Is it a set of things that sort of stay with them?
So yeah, no, that's a great question. And to be honest, there is no longitudinal research. It just doesn't exist. And the reason is very simple, is that the funding usually lasts for 3 years and then it ends. And up to now, most of the funding was devoted for us to create technologies, but not really to follow up kids or to follow them for 1 or 2 years. But however, we hear stories and we love stories, and we see results, although I want to be very clear that there's no formal research done yet in longitudinal. But what we see is two different things. There are those kids that have the opportunity to continue this kind of playground approach throughout, once they leave kindergarten, first and second grade, and those tend to continue into computer science and engineering, right? Not necessarily to study those disciplines, but those are the ones that can fix the TV, or the grandma calls, that's the techie kid that everyone will call. Unfortunately, there are those others that started passionate because it was a playground approach, but as they go through schooling, it becomes more of a playpen, the teaching of computer science and engineering. And so it stops being fun, and some of those just quit, right? So I kind of feel that we need to be mindful that all the opportunities that we give children to play with computer science and ideas early on should continue throughout, because we lose some kids.
Yeah, I suspect that maybe it's true of a lot of things, that, you know, we give kids a sort of a playground at an early age, and we, you know, same might be true of art. You know, that, you know, kids are allowed to be a lot more open-ended and expressive at a younger age, and as we constrain them, it becomes less fun and less interesting and whatever. So your one question on your website, it says that Scratch Junior and Kibo are for 4 to 5 years old. What do you think a 2 and 3-year-old should be doing, if anything?
Yeah, so we recommend Scratch Junior and Kibo to start at 4, and it goes all the way to second grade, right? So 2 and 3-year-olds, you can get into computational thinking, into problem solving by, you know, anything. So for example, you can bring your Tupperwares and have them, put them in order from big to small. You can have them, you know, because the concepts are there. I personally do not want a 2 and a 3-year-old in front of a computer. And I personally do think that some of these computational thinking ideas, all those 6 ideas or 7 ideas, powerful ideas of computer science, can be achieved through unplugged forms of of activities. You want to be mindful, but you want to be unplugging. As they get a little bit older, you can start introducing, to be honest, a 2 and a 3-year-old will be finding a playpen type of technology. That's not my choice. There's nothing, I don't have anything against it, but I like playgrounds, not playpens.
So it seems like you're, for the youngest kids, you're sort of recommending more sort of other type of activities, really.
Yeah, nature, use your, a lot of things that you do very well at the museum.
That's good to know that we're not out of business. One of the questions, and you sort of touched on it a little bit, was the sort of values of maybe starting early with programming for women and for disadvantaged populations. Do you think that, there's a lot of work that's been done on sort of understanding why women drop out of the STEM careers later on. Do you think that if people were introduced at a younger age, that would have a more positive impact on, sort of their career choices and involvement in STEM later on?
So I think it's a combination. So there's no one bullet, right, that solves it. I think starting early, so opening the door so more people come in, but then you need to stay. And we know from research that mentorship has a lot to do with that. So if we don't have a lot of women who are mentors, women tend to go out. If we don't own to the needs of women, right? And we pretend that we don't have certain needs, like we're nursing, for example, and therefore we have certain needs. So I think it's not just starting early, but it's this, if they are choosing STEM field, then how do we provide the needed structures to support them? And that goes not just for women, right? But I think that's why I like the Singapore image, because we're all unique in our own needs. And so how can we create work environments that are supportive for all of our different needs?
Right, that's good. We have a question from somebody who's a preschool teacher. She says she loves the idea of comparing the playground to the playpen approach. Like she really that image really worked for her, and she's thinking about how to incorporate computational thinking into her classroom, keeping in mind she's a preschool teacher. Do you have suggestions of where I should start? They don't have any robotic materials. Like, how do you start doing this without Kibo or without Scratch?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of activities that are called Unplug Computer Science. And if you just do a Google search for Unplug Computer Science, you'll find lots of activities. Our curriculum always have unplug time. So even if you go to our curriculum, you can just look for and only do unplug activities, right? And you'll have lots of those. So I think it's wonderful to bring computational thinking into the classroom, and you don't necessarily bring technology.
Right. I mean, that's a really good question to ask you one about the museum, if I can bear people's indulgence on this. The museum has sort of been historically our museum and a lot of the world, less tech involved and not really focused on computation. But how would you imagine a place like us sort of transitioning to have some balance between our traditional mode of doing business and adding computational sort of coding into our environment?
Yeah, so I can imagine different ways. So the most simple way is you could have a sector where you have different robotic kits, and there are a lot of those that are very simple, and children and parents can explore together. And you can have what we call activity guides, which is just one page with very simple what if. And if parents can come together with the kids, maybe you don't need one or two staff people, but it's not a traditional class. It's like a playground, robotic playground, where they can explore different. So that's the most traditional way. Then there's another one that's the most interesting or challenging way that has been a dream of mine for a long time, which is, what would it look like to have a smart playground, like an outside space? Why always computation needs to happen inside, right? Imagine if you have an outside playground that's augmented by computation. So when children, for example, press a big button, they can measure how fast a child is coming down the slide.
Yeah.
How fast the child is coming down the slide is going to control the sound that something else makes. And so you can have children programming the playground with their own bodies. And so those are, and I have, actually I'm working on a proposal of that. So I have very clear ideas of how to go about that. But I think that's fantastic. There are other countries that have started to explore with smart playgrounds and bring computation outside into the public spaces.
Yeah, I mean the idea of playing with scale there a little bit of, having the blocks, even at the way they're set, control something that's very large would be kind of, I love the idea of the smart playground.
Actually, Neil, let me follow up on that, because one of my students, for his thesis, he built a giant kibo and programming with giant blocks, and kids would jump around and ride the kibo. And for someone there, when we were doing the, pretend play, it's something that happens in the playground. And we noticed that the kind of pretend play that happens when you have big robotic structures is very different than the one that you have when you have small. And so that's an very interesting idea.
Yeah. No, that's I like that idea. And I particularly like your discussion about how, the notion of building languages, building bridges, building this palette of virtues. I mean, it really says, starts to talk about the value of all of this in much broader terms than you've learned how to program, right? It's you're not talking about building a skill. You're talking about building a much broader set of important aspect or parts of people's lives. I think that's terrific. One person asked, do you find that Scratch Junior is a tough sell for parents who don't see themselves as very sort of tech or STEM savvy?
Well, it depends on the attitude about the parent with the technology. So for parents who are okay letting the child be in control of the app, those parents will find that the child will learn on their own, right? But if a parent feels that they have to actually teach the children, their philosophy is different, then the parents who are not tech savvy might have a little bit of a harder time. However, Scratch Junior is designed for 4 and 5 year olds who do not know how to learn how to read, and they are puzzle pieces. So you really I haven't encountered a single person that cannot program with Scratch Junior. You might not be able to do as sophisticated projects as the ones I've shown, but it's pretty easy to get started, and there's a lot of support out there. And if the adult lets the child lead, they will learn. Right.
So that's interesting. So does that mean the Scratch Junior is essentially sort of neutral on the kid's own language? I mean, is it equally learnable across any language speaking?
Exactly. And that was one of the things we did. We imagine no one can understand the written language.
Sure.
So let's just make symbols. And that's where the concept of representation and abstraction, right? They first need to understand that a symbol represents something, which for adults is obvious, but for kids is not obvious, right? But once you get that, then it's pretty serious. For the adults, there's a little trick. If you put your finger over, it will display the text. So once an adult learns that, anyone can program. The thing is, for kids, it doesn't mean anything because they still cannot read what it says.
Right. So the adults learn to cheat right away.
Right away. And we actually have a community of volunteers all over the world that have translated those words into 49 languages. So we have parents all over the world. I want to comment because I see here someone that posted about playgrounds and playpens and sandboxes.
Yeah.
So I like, sandboxes has been used as a metaphor. I like better playgrounds because in the sandbox, it's just one, right? There's a sandbox and there's one material, there's sand. In the playground, there's all kinds of elements. There's the slide, there's the swing, there's the sandbox, there's the grass, there is a, you name it. And the idea that with programming, you also have different opportunities. You can decorate, you can draw, you can use sound, you can do programming itself. And so that's why I like a little bit better to the metaphor of a playground, where you can choose an entry point, while the sandbox, at the end, you're working with sand, right?
Well, they're both great metaphors for really important things, either way. So maybe just to wrap up and sort of give what sort of is the prevalence now of Scratch Junior out there? Is it more being used in early childhood settings, or is it being more used at home? Where are we seeing these items being used?
Yeah, so Scratch Junior, I would say it's used almost every school, kindergarten, first, second grade, very, very popular. And right now we're doing a big study with all Boston public schools and Rhode Island public schools, and I know California. I mean, it's in almost everywhere. I have not seen it in preschools as much, because in preschools I've seen keyboard a lot more, because they don't want screens, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why. But it's very, very, it's the most popular programming language for kids, and it's free.
Yeah.
That's one advantage over keyboard, right? That keyboard's a robot, so you have to buy it. But Scratch Junior is free, and it will always be free. And we have lots of resources out there. We have a community that's called Scratch Junior Connect, with people from all over the world post their activities and what to do with Scratch Junior.
That's
And
terrific.
someone there posted my website. If you go into the DevTech website, you'll see links to lots of activities with everything.
I would just point out for all of the folks listening in that many of the things that Marina has mentioned tonight, we've put in the chat function, so you'll be able to grab them and with that. And then, if there are, I believe, Marina, you said we could share your presentation out later as well.
Yeah, they can share. Yeah, well, the video recording, right?
Exactly, the video recording.
Yeah.
That's great. It's just been great, Marina. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this tonight, and I appreciate all the folks who were out there who joined in and had good questions. I think you've given everybody a mission to go out and think about this for their own kids and their grandkids, in my case. That's terrific.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. And everybody who was joined us tonight will be getting a follow-up survey. So I would hope you'll take a chance to give us your feedback about the session tonight and our future plans. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. So with that, I'd say good night, Marina, and thank you.
Bye. Good night. Thank you.